Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast post-game edition. Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack. It is 1:26 a.m. Sunday morning after Oregon found themselves in a game where not only were they in a close one, they had to come back in the fourth quarter to win 37-34. Boise State scored 17 points in the second quarter. They scored 14 points in what felt like 3 minutes in the fourth quarter because of two turnovers. Yeah, Oregon finds a way to win 37-34. And guys, like another game where you feel more concerned than you do confident in this team. And I was thinking about this on the drive home that like this feels like I know they won. That's the only stat that matters, but this feels like one of those weekends where Oregon loses a monumental game and you just want to like walk away. You don't want to like think about the game because it was just bad. And that's kind of what I have. Like they're not good right now. And they're playing well enough in spurts to win, but there's major concerns with this team.
100% there are. That was tough. That was a tough watch, man. And like, I give them a lot of credit for winning the game because it really felt like after a couple of turnovers and Boise State had some momentum, the long touchdown run, the touchdown that followed the Gabriel fumble, in the red zone. I was like, wow, they might just lose this game. And to come out of this with the win, to be 2-0, like honestly, like kind of feels impressive just because of how poorly they've played at times in both of these games against what I think we both or all would agree is inferior competition. Boise State, that's a pretty good football team. They impressed me in a lot of ways. And frankly, I think if they had just a little better quarterback play, this game goes a different direction. And frankly, if Oregon doesn't make a couple plays late, it does too. But to your point, Matt, and we'll get into this as we roll here, like some of the things we were concerned about after week one, still concerns. Some of the things seem like they got rectified. But also a lot of things that really weren't on our radar quite as much kind of popped up here. And I think this team, a team that we predicted would win a ton of games and play deep into the playoffs, maybe into January, it certainly feels like a lot has to change for those sort of things to be achieved. Like this does not, like we saw last year, a team, I know that they had some ups and downs. Texas Tech was a really tough game, kind of similar in terms of they had to come back. They needed to, a late kick to win. But the way I think we felt going into conference play a year ago feels different in terms of like just the barometer for a team being good. Like there's a lot of things with this team that just aren't really easy to watch and make you kind of uncomfortable. And it was a game of kind of one step forward, one step back, and that's not really how you want to see a team that's projected to win a ton of games.
Yeah, a lot of the concerns that we had last week, it was kind of we all chalked it up to I specifically was like, there's a lot of execution mistakes, and those still happened in this game. So I don't know if these are more concerns as they are actual problems. And I think that's what will eventually be kind of sorted out throughout the season. Like the offensive line, I mean, James did it. Like he had was it 56 different like kind of rotations and things that they had or whatever it was in the offensive line. It's not that much, but like
I think it was 56 plays and 11 different iterations or something.
Yeah, and like that seems to be a real problem right now. I mean, maybe I'm saying the obvious here, but for 75-80% of the game, they were constantly rotating between center and left and right guard, which like I get it. And Dan said it after in his press conference, like, oh, we've always rotated offensive line, like, and yeah, they have, but it's not like this. It certainly isn't anything close to resembling what it is now. So that has been more like a concern turned into a real issue that could really hurt them down the line if it doesn't get solved. And the other thing are the penalties, man. I mean, both games we talked about it where penalties killed them in red areas, high red areas, and just destroying drives. And that happened again today. This is another situation where a lot of penalties either didn't even allow for a drive to get started, like a holding penalty on Kenny Sadiq and then Trayshawn Holden's personal foul after the play, just chalked it up. That whole drive just died right then and there. And then more holding penalties on different drives, like just silly execution problems that really let Boise State get back into the game. And then there's, like Eric said, there's a whole bunch of other things that are popping up kind of left and right here. And yeah, there are a lot of things that need to be fixed. And, Dan's very confident after the game that these are things that, the coaches should be doing. Like, these are things that we can fix and they can move on and do better in future games. But we got to see it, man, because everything that was a problem against Idaho, mind you, showed up and roared its head once again against Boise State. And, so at some point, like, habits become, trends become habits, and this becomes a real problem. So we'll see.
I mean, it's stuff that just shouldn't straight up happen. And I think that's what the difference between last year and the year before, that this, when they lost or when they struggled, it was because they were playing a team that had as good, if not better, players. And these two games, like, on paper, Oregon is significantly more talented than either of these two teams. And we've had 2 games in a row now where Oregon has had an offsides penalty on a kickoff. That's just lazy execution and not caring. They've had kicks out of bounds. They've had, Jared mentioned the Trayshawn Holden stuff a lot, where he got penalized for an after the play penalty. Like, that stuff can't happen. And I mentioned to Eric, like, during the game, where it feel like, we know, we go to practice, we watch them practice, but it's like, what is happening at practice that's not translating to guys being able to figure it out? And I thought about this when Jared was talking. I go back to last week, and Dan was asked a question of, when does accountability play in and playing time get removed from guys because they keep making mistakes? And he said, when we have the depth to do that. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that was the answer. And I don't know what to take of this team. Like, we think they're really good on paper. They're really good, but then we get comments like that, and then, like, we see rotations, and they, like Jared said, they brought up the idea that they do these spot trainings since January, and Dylan talked about how he's taken snaps from all 5 centers, but it's like the quarterback thing. If you've got 2, you don't have 1, and at some point, it's probably not a good idea to have 2 different guys snapping the ball with Dylan Gabriel in a game. And it's a concern now. They should beat Oregon State. They should blow Oregon State out. But I've said that the last 2 games, and they've needed to come back in the fourth quarter in both those to win the game. And, eventually time's going to run out. And Dylan, I was really happy that Dylan Gabriel was just straight up honest. Like, the shit has to stop. Like, they have to be better. And and he's right, because eventually it's going to come, they're going to play a team where you can't afford to have 9 penalties for 74 yards and go 4 of 12 on third down and need your special teams to score 2 touchdowns for you to win a game. Like, eventually you're going to play a team where you do those things, you lose by 3, or you lose by 3 touchdowns.
One thing you said there, Matt, kind of stood out, and it was that this team should be good on paper. I agree. I also think today was a weird game where we saw them actually be good on the field for stretches. And what was so maddening was turn around and then be, just like, as you said, make some really strange errors that are like
dumb mistakes.
Yeah, just like, I mean, I think there's a couple of circumstances that really stand out where I turned to either one of you guys. We sit next to each other in the press box and said, okay, here's a moment to separate. One was in the midway through the second quarter. They get a stop. They're up. I think they're up 7 or up 4. I think up 4, 14-10. And that's the sequence we just talked about with the Sadiq penalty, the Holden penalty, a sack that puts you back. They punt it to short field. They come down. Boise State takes the lead. That was an opportunity. You could have easily. They had the momentum. The defense is playing well. And then in the second half, obviously, like, it felt like, to me, Oregon really had kind of outplayed Boise State in that third quarter pretty significantly. Like, Boise State's offense didn't do a whole lot. Oregon's driving, has an opportunity to, again, create a 2-score game. And they're moving, I think, close to the red zone, and Pat Herbert fumbles it on a screen pass. And the next play that Boise State has is a 70-yard touchdown. And, like, those are these sequences that are so frustrating, I think, to watch. And I'm we'll talk about some positives because I'm sure we're going to get in the comments people saying they won the game. Like, let's celebrate some of that. And there are things to celebrate. And that's kind of my point of like, they're mixed in between all of this, just like, pull your hair out. Frustrating moments are like these moments of, beautiful execution of really well timed up long pass plays of Jordan James finding the corner and turning up field of the defense. I mean, Maddox Madsen was 17 for 40 in this game. Like, he did 148 yards. Like, they didn't throw the ball very well. And a lot of that was, I was looking at right before we got on here, 12 pass breakups in this game, a ton of QB pressures. Like, there were moments where you're like, this is what we expected to see, but it seemed like it was just one of those moments was almost immediately followed by just kind of a thing where you're going, what's going on here? And so some of this is execution. It's early season, mixing in a lot of new players, but I also wonder like if some of this is like a mentality thing or a mindset thing. And it makes me go back to Trayshawn's comments, on Wednesday, where he was talking about it and saying our biggest issue was we went into the game thinking we were going to win against Idaho, and you can't do that. And I don't know if that was what happened here or if it was something different, but some of this kind of almost feels mental a little bit at times, where it's like a lack of focus of here's a play of absolute brilliance followed by a play where you're going like, I've seen execution of that sort of thing better, like in the Pop Warner levels. So
they had a play where the umpire was literally talking on the microphone trying to explain something, and Charlie Pickard snapped the ball thinking the game was going on.
That was one where I was going, and it didn't matter because they obviously, but I'm going like, that sort of just proves how disjointed they are, where Pickard thinks that you can snap the ball when the umpire is making clarifying a call or whatever it was.
Yeah, and I was going to bring that up too, like what Matt pointed out with like having two centers and when you don't have one. The fumble from Gabriel, again, similar. Like, Gabriel was trying to call something else and was coming up towards the line of scrimmage to tell his offensive line, hey, we're going to do this instead. And then Pickard snaps it. Somehow Gabriel catches it, ultimately, runs and is a forced fumble. But, that can't happen. And the Pickard one earlier, and I'm not trying to blame it all on Charlie, but when you're rotating centers, I feel like that is a significant difference than if you were rotating a guard or maybe even a tackle. Like, the center rotation, I thought was significantly better when it was Poncho at center and Nishad Strother at left or right guard, whatever it was. So I wanted to bring that up, and I wanted to bring up another point that Matt made with like all the third down stuff. Can either of you guys guess what Oregon's average third down distance was?
Like probably 3rd and 9.
I think it was less than that. 3rd and 4.
Matt wins 8.7.
Matt's right on it.
3rd and 8.7. You want to know why Oregon was so bad on third downs? Is because it was basically 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10 every time because of the penalties, just the stupid decisions. Like, and that killed them all game long. Like, if you go in the stats and you like Jordan James, I thought had a great game, 102 yards on the ground. He could have had 30, 40, 50 more, but he had at least 3 or 4 really big, really good runs, 2 massive runs called back due to holding calls, one on Poncho, and I think the other on Marcus Harper, if I remember correctly. Like, that goes to show that these are really pivotal mistakes. And it happened last week and it happened this week. And Oregon again, and I'm not trying to like take away from the deficiencies that Oregon had, but this should have been in the second half, very specifically, should have been all Oregon. Like, they should not have been in either of these situations because both of Boise State's touchdowns came off of fumbles. They came off of miscues. And the Patrick Herbert one, stuff happens. It was a good hit by the safety there, but again, the Dylan Gabriel one comes directly off of a bad snap where they're rotating centers all the time. There are like Eric went. There's just a lot of miscommunications. Like, the gears just aren't all turning on all cylinders, but then you have these moments where the bike is moving, the gears are fixed, everything is going downhill, and it's a good downhill where the running game is great. They're setting up play action passes or RPOs where they're finding deep balls. The defense is stuffing the line of scrimmage and playing great defense in the secondary. Like, there are moments where you're like, oh, boom, that's the winning team that Oregon has. And then they just shit the bed right thereafter. So very frustrating game. Like, this is a much better team than they put on paper, or not that they put on paper, but what they put on the field these past 2 Saturdays. And I bet this drives Dan Lanning up a freaking wall because of how much better they could be than what they're showing on the field.
It's mind-boggling, and I think all three of us are confused about how this is happening, why it continues to happen, and the reality is now. I was talking with Tyson Alger, I-5 corridor, and on the way to the press conference, and he posed an interesting question, situation to look at. Of imagine if Oregon had dominated Idaho last week, what the narrative of this game would be. Wow, that was really awesome. Boise State's really good. They hung with a really good Oregon team.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how good Oregon is. Like, I know Idaho today went and beat Wyoming. Wyoming stinks. Like, is that really a win? That's basically the two FCS teams. We think Boise State's really good. I'm in full agreement with both of you guys that, like, Janty's a stud. This team's good, but it's 2 weeks now, and we still don't really have a clear idea of where this team is at. And in a way, this kind of reminds me of like Washington last year outside of the Oregon games, where they always play close, they always play ugly in the regular season, and somehow they find ways to win. And you look at it and you're like, they're not as good as their ranking. They're not as good as they should be. Like, this team isn't very good. They'll get beat. It's 2 weeks in. Who knows how long that streak will go for Oregon, but I don't know. Like, I've changed my perspective on next week. Like, I mentioned it on our exit of Autzen. Like, they should win. I don't think Oregon State's got a talented roster, but I've said that the last 2 weeks, and they've needed to pull miracles out to win. And until this, like Jared said it best, until this team actually shows us that they can play consistent football, and we have to doubt it. We can't believe it until it actually happens. Like, we say they're going to be good, but they're not there yet. And then I know football is a developmental sport, and I know some people when we've spoken with them from Oregon post game the last 2 weeks have kind of danced around the idea, of they're not playing good. They're not good right now, But I appreciate Gabriel coming out like, yeah, like this has to stop. Like, he's the only one that's really kind of come out and been like, this isn't good enough.
Yeah. By the way, credit for making an analogy where you compared Oregon to probably the most hated team of the last decade, and then also making it like a kind of a glasses half full of like, yeah, but maybe they're just going to keep pulling these games out.
But that's what everyone said about Washington last year. They're not good. They're not good. Wait till they play Oregon. Then they play their best football, up until that point when they played Oregon.
And shoot, that might be what this team is. They might be a team where when they're, maybe it's just push comes to shove team where when they're faced back against the wall, they figure it out and they pull out a bunch of games. It's going to be really frustrating. It's not the type of football we've seen under Dan Lanning primarily when they've won. Like, I don't have the top of my head, but I bet the margin of victory and wins for, the 23 games coming into this year for Lanning were probably on average 15, 20 plus points. So far, a couple weeks in here, it's been, an average of 6.5. So, and not against teams we thought these would be competitive. Like 50-point spread last week, win by 10. About a 20-point spread this week, win on the last second field goal. Like, this is your point, Matt. Like, they're not winning pretty at all. And how sustainable is playing this way? And I guess just that kind of my last thought on some of the negatives, because I do think there are some positives we can get into if we want. I don't know. We could just continue. But like, I do really get concerned that some of this is going to be systemic, and that whether it be just a lack of talent on the interior offensive line or a lack of competency pre-snap. I think a lot of this is pre-snap, to be honest. It just seems like these guys don't.
Yeah, the communication just doesn't seem like it's there.
It seems off, And again, I think you had really good examples the last 2 years with Bo Nix, who was obviously really advanced in that regard, and then Alex Forsyth, who was, an excellent center, really, really good at that, and then was able to kind of work with Jackson to get him to a level where he was, winning the Remington. It might just be a thing where this is a year where Bo Nix or Dylan Gabriel's not Bo Nix, that there's continual problems where he's getting whacked every 4 or 5 plays because they're not picking up the right pass rush or making the right adjustments pre-snap. And it might be a situation where whether it's Charlie or Poncho, whoever ends up doing this long term, because I don't think it's sustainable to rotate all year. That whoever the guy is, maybe just is not going to be anywhere near as good as what we've seen the standard be the last 2 years. And this is just what this team is. Like I'm coming to terms with the fact that might be where this is headed in a season where they're really talented on the out. That this team had some awesome passes down the field. That was something that we were looking for against Idaho. That was corrected, but that they're going to need to be a feast or famine offense because they're going to have drives that get just derailed by sacks that happened all the time in the first half, or derailed by penalties like we've talked about, which happened throughout this game, or turnovers like we saw, in crucial spots in the third and fourth quarter. So I think those are real concerns of like, I don't know if that's going to be really correctable. And next week against Oregon State, Matt said it as we walked out, like I'm a little nervous about this operation going on the road. They had a hard time playing in a home environment with, limited crowd noise. That Beaver crowd is going to be fired up, and they're going to do whatever they can to impact a game. I don't know how good I feel about dealing with Charlie or dealing with Poncho snapping the ball and getting everything organized pre-snap. Like, honestly, that kind of scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, no, and justifiably so. I think us as media watchers of Oregon and then Oregon fans have been pretty spoiled by how well the offensive line has played the last couple of seasons. And not to say that Oregon's offensive line performance is like how the rest of the country is, because there's a lot of good offensive lines, but this is kind of more like generally towards the normal of how an offensive line operates. It's just seemingly coming at pretty terrible times, like on a second down and short, or a strip sack here and there. But it's certainly concerning. I still think that they got better. I thought Oregon actually did a good job, and like after the first quarter, really, in terms of like pre-snap adjustments on the line. Like the touchdown to Trayshawn Holden was a pre-snap adjustment because Dylan Gabriel saw all the pressure and cut it so that's a shorter route for Trayshawn, and just had to get the ball out immediately because Boise State brought like 6 or 7 guys up in the box. And it turned out great because they scored a touchdown on it. But I thought they got better with pre-snap adjustments as the game got on. Again, their third quarter was great, I thought, in their offensive game plan and their calling. And again, the deep shots were there. And Dylan Gabriel was awesome tonight. He missed like four total passes. Like that was it. It was just 3. Yeah, no, he was great, and he makes all the right decisions. And like when he needs to get the ball out quick, he can. It's just, I think, getting a better understanding of who they're going to have at center. I really think that Poncho was the best center on the field tonight. And I think going back and reviewing the film, we'll all kind of come to our own conclusion on that, and so will the team. But I think Poncho's going to stand out. I didn't think that there were any bad snaps from him when he was playing center. I thought Strother was a pretty good addition. I thought they moved the ball better. They ran to the left side of the line a lot when Strother was in the game. I think that it's just going to come down to finding the best 5 out there. And I think Dan talked about that a lot post game of like, we're going to continue to shuffle. We're just going to find the right 5. And eventually that needs to happen because they can't, like Eric said, they can't be rotating centers all the time. That's just not like sustainable, and it's not good for the offense. I think that's just too many moving parts. But, the offense looked a lot better tonight, 100%. And I know that the 2 turnovers really sucked because Boise State just went down the field and scored after both of them. But, Evan Stewart finally broke free. He was awesome tonight. He was electric, and it came right out of the gates with the 67-yard pass down the left sideline in the first quarter. And then they were just able to move the ball a lot. And even on the throws that Dylan Gabriel missed, those were like 2 touchdown throws. They just missed, and it happens. And unfortunately, it came at a time where a touchdown would have been nice and would have put them up by 7 or 14, whatever the score was at the time. But I thought they ran the ball a lot better, which was really encouraging considering what we saw last week against Idaho, where they really couldn't move the ball. And when you take the yardage on the ground, like without sacks, I thought it was actually pretty impressive. It was 141, 4.4 yards per average. So not as good as Boise State, but they don't have the same running back as Boise State. So encouraging signs on offense. It just needs still the execution is really killing them.
Can't believe I'm going to be the half glass empty guy here, because I agree with everything that Jared just said. But I just want to point out, like we talked about this on the way out, that both teams played with interior line issues. And like Boise State starting center did not play. That was a late scratch. And then their right guard, like the third play of the game, basically got carted off the field. And
looked bad, by the way. It didn't look
yes. Good. And their run game did not skip a beat. And Oregon got a bunch of pressure, I think, on Madsen at quarterback, but their run game did not skip a beat. And for Oregon, Jared's right. It is better. Jordan James, 102 yards, 6-yard carry average. But I think a good chunk of that, at least half of that, felt like, at least in the first half, and that's to Jared's point, in the second half, things got cleaned up. But in the first half, a lot of that was just his own doing of nothing there and creating. And so, like, I guess I'm just going to present the half glass empty approach here. Is like, I still think that there's concerns with the run game consistently. They need to figure it out. And I think it goes to Jared's point, though. Like, you got to pick a center, and it's probably going to need to be Poncho. And I'll be curious to know, like, I wasn't tracking. I think maybe Jared was, of who was at center, who was at guard on the scoring drives. How many of those, like the big plays, the passing plays, who was at center, like what the protection was. We know the first one because it was obvious. Like, Saj Striller came in the third possession of the game and clean pocket, gave Gabriel time to throw, and they connected on the bomb. But just those little things, and that's, what I guess Dan's talking about, is they're going to have to make some evaluations. But I would expect this third game they kind of settle in, because if they're still rotating again, it's going to be more cause for concern, I think.
I kind of think they're going to keep rotating. I hate to say it, I mean, because they kept rotating in this game even after. I mean, to Matt's point, like, we joked about it in the Matt turned to me in the press box and went, I guess it was all they need to do is put in Struther, because his first play was a 67-yard pass to Evan Stewart, and then they brought him out of the game 2 drives later, and then they put him back in, and musical chairs the whole rest of the way. So Dan also didn't like poo-poo the notion when I asked him about it, like if it was sustainable to do that. So my guess is they're going to rotate these guys, get to the bye week, which, boy, is that bye week come at I was hating it preseason of like, oh man, it's a really early bye. It's about as early as it possibly could be. Like, you'd love to have that in the middle of conference play and have 2 kind of in maybe, October and November, but it's a well-timed bye. You could theoretically get some guys healthier, but really it would be great to just make some determinations on some of this stuff. And who knows, maybe they will come and go up to Corvallis and say, boy, Charlie really didn't play well enough. Poncho is clearly better. We're going to roll with Poncho, and Charlie can be available, but we're not going to incorporate him in like this every 2-drive rotation. But I that's not kind of the sense I got just watching the way this game played out, because there were moments where it did feel like the offense hummed better with one of them at center, and yet they went right back and rotated. So I agree. That's kind of a mystifying thing. And I kind of hope I'm wrong. I kind of hope, to Jared's point, they just settle on a guy next week, but I don't know if I expect that'll be the case. And I guess if Bedford comes back, maybe that simplifies things. Maybe. I don't know. Defense. Atticus Sappington made a game-winning field goal. I'm just trying to think of good things to talk about, because 2 kickoff returns for two special teams touchdowns. Like, this was fun. These were good things. Oregon hadn't had a punt return touchdown for 6 years, or a kick return touchdown for 5, and they had both of them this game. And frankly, they needed both of them because they didn't have one of them probably lose. So we've wanted to see
2001.
What's that?
2001, since they did both in the same game.
Yeah, 2001 against Stanford. We were told that was the last time. So we wanted to see some explosiveness out of the special teams, and boy, did we see it. And it came in huge moments and huge opportunities. And I thought both of them were really good individual efforts, but also, like, you watch it, some really great blocks thrown around the field. So, like, that was great. It was good to see the kicker make, even though it was a chip shot, it was basically an extra point. It's good to see him split the uprights after he'd missed an extra point earlier. Like, for as frustrating as special teams can be at Oregon and how lackluster it has been, and there certainly were problems because we had kicks out of bounds, we'd missed extra points and holds, or blocking the backs or whatever on returns. But there's a couple of moments there that really flipped the game that were special teams related, and it ends with one of those. So I guess I'm reaching for some positives to talk about, as we reach 2 a.m. on this podcast, and I think we haven't really talked at all about special teams, and that's probably the story of the game, honestly.
Yeah, no, 100%. And defensively, I thought Oregon played really well.
Yeah.
Ashton Genty is a hell of a running back, and you just knew like at one point he was gonna break one free. He's just that good of a player where it's like, all right, this is gonna happen. This hopefully doesn't come at a bad moment. Unfortunately for Oregon, it came at a kind of really horrible moment, like right after a fumble. So that kind of stuck for their defense. But all in all, like I thought they played really well. I thought Bryce Betcher was great. He led the team with 9 tackles. Jordan Birch, Brandon Johnson, and Jeff Bossa all had 8 tackles. Like they were flying to the ball. I thought Devin Jackson played really well in his moments. I thought Derek Harmon and Birch were both able to get a lot of pressure either from the interior on edge rush. Like I thought the defense played really well. It's just that unfortunately they were handed like 2 extra drives because of those fumbles and because of like the Trayshawn penalty where the punt is you just don't get as much distance and then it's a short field. Like I thought they did as best as they could, and then like that third quarter they were spectacular. They played a lot of sets in that third quarter where there were basically 5 down linemen. They would either rotate in like Amarion Winston. It was usually with Tatum Tuioti and Mateo Uyunglele. Like that worked. Like they finally figured it out. They went big packages, 5 linemen, 2 linebackers, and then 4 defensive backs. And I thought that really worked. And I thought they did a really good job coming into the second half, making adjustments from the first half. And again, I still think that this is very clearly the strength of the team right now is their defense. And I really only see it getting better, similar to how it did last year, where the guys who did come in as transfers like Jabbar Muhammad and Brandon Johnson and Kobe Savage like get more acclimated to the system, and then they continue to thrive in their role. So I thought that was a huge positive, even though the score kind of doesn't really reflect that with 34 points. Like I thought they played well. It's just Ashton Genty is a hell of a running back, and watching him and watching Jordan James, who's another really talented player, like there's such a huge difference between those two guys, and that's why Genty is going to be like a first round or second round pick going in the 2025 NFL draft. Like he's just a special talent.
I think Derek Harmon's been probably the most impressive defensive player we've seen through 2 weeks, at least in my eyes. Really good against the run, and his ability to just blow through a offensive line trying to pass protect is pretty fun to watch. 3 quarterback hurries today. Like they've double teamed him. He's seen double teams. He's fought through it. He gets one-on-one coverage. He gets through it. James Crepey of the Oregonian like hyped him up and Caldwell up all preseason about their body types and how rare it is. And like Harmon has like it's pretty cool to see a guy who shows up with high expectations as a newcomer and in my eyes kind of exceed those or at least easily match them. And he's been that for Oregon. Like they put a lot of trust in their evaluations in the portal with Harmon and Caldwell to be instant impact players for their defensive line. And Harmon especially has just been an absolute dog. And Jared's right. Like Betcher's played amazing the last 2 weeks at linebacker. Devin Jackson has seen a ton of playing time and has played well too. But Harmon for me has just been a revelation for the defensive line.
I wasn't expecting him to be as good on pass downs.
Yeah.
Like, in my mind, he was like, this guy's going to be kick-ass on rundowns. He's going to clog up holes, but he's really disruptive on every single down he's out there. And I know they're. I'd be curious to see snap counts tomorrow because Dan has talked about not trying to play these guys more than 40 plays. I think is what the goal is.
40, 45. Yeah.
It felt like they played these interior guys a ton, and there weren't a lot of like Jared, how much Amari Washington do you think we saw?
I would guess his snap count tomorrow is probably like anywhere from the mid-teens to the low 20s. He was in there, but he was not like you said, like they didn't really rotate their starting 4.
Yeah, it seemed like they stuck with those guys, and I don't blame them. I mean, those guys are really disruptive, and while Genty has an awesome game, there was also mixed in there. I wish it was broken down a little better in the play-by-play. a lot of plays where he just had nowhere to go, and that was credit to Oregon's defensive line of clogging holes and making it difficult. I mean, shoot, you could get 3 guys on him and he'd still fall forward for 2 or 3 yards because that's the kind of player he is. But I thought, in a weird way, because he also obviously ran for like almost 200 yards, I thought they did a really good job with him for large kind of portions of this game. And yet he had the answer, which is why he's such a great player. And Oregon had it looked like kind of a defensive bust on the 70-yarder. Dan kind of alluded to it. I'd like to go back and see it again just to kind of see where things went wrong. But, you know, I thought the defensive front played pretty well. It was a little quieter day for Mateo. I thought this was Devin Jackson's best game as a Duck. I thought he was awesome. As one of the few guys who it seemed like when he and Janty were to meet in the hole that he actually went back as opposed to just driving forward. I think Oregon's really good at all 3 levels, has really good individual players. I think the portal has been awesome if you look across the board. Like, we haven't seen Cam Alexander. We have to acknowledge that he's just missed the first 2. Jabbar was great tonight. Brandon Johnson continues to be a stud. Kobe Savage makes plays. He's very, very active at the very least. And shoot, these guys in the defensive line are great. So, I think that's the one kind of thing to kind of feel, okay, you get into these weird dogfight games like tonight, and at least you have a defense who, when it matters most there, because remember, Oregon goes down and kicks that game-winning field goal, but what directly preceded that were 2 fumbles, which Boise State did capitalize in, but also a drive following an Oregon, I think a 5-play drive with a punt. But Boise State had an opportunity there to do their own thing, to go down there and put that game either to bed or to take the lead. And Oregon's defense said, not so fast, and held them and forced another punt. So a lot of credit to those guys. And just in general, I thought this team was actually pretty resilient, probably more resilient than they should have needed to be, given this is a game where I feel like you execute a little better in a dozen plays here and this game could be way, way more favorable for Oregon. And also, like, if you don't have a couple special teams touchdown returns, it probably should have gone the other. So really a weird game to be at in all honesty.
Yeah. I don't have any more. It's 2 a.m.
Yeah, it's 2 a.m., man. I think maybe we've reached our the end of what we've got in the minds. You're on mute, Matt. Oh.
Well,
something happened with Matt. So Jared, let's wrap this show up. Thanks for listening to this one. It's 2:03. I don't know what happened with Matt, but he just took off. I don't blame him, because it's now Sunday morning and I want to get to bed here. But for Matt Preem and Jared Mack, this is Eric Scopel signing off from the Autzen Audibles podcast. Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.